Hi everyone, my name is Claire Kilburn. I am from Alliance Service Dog Training, and I am based in Toronto, and we specifically help owner trainers with their own dogs through private lessons, group classes, and board and train.
Okay, I'm Sharon Wachsler. I'm the owner of At Your Service Dog Training. We are based in Western Massachusetts, but we do online training as well as in person, so we cover pretty much the whole United States. And we do online group classes and lessons and board and train, specifically also for people who are training their own service dogs, as well as helping people select the right dog to train. And I have been involved in owner training service dogs since 1998, when I started training my own first service dog for myself. And it's sort of been my passion ever since then.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Brame from Ruby Dog Training in the Philadelphia area, and I've been training dogs for many, many years, and started training service dogs about 5 years ago, specializing in psychiatric service dogs, working mainly with owner-trained service dogs.
Okay, and our fourth panelist?
Oh, this is Vita, professional treat eating machine.
And Snuggler.
Snuggler, yes, she's got that on her resume as well.
Okay.
Amazing. So we're going to answer some questions from people from all over the internet. And our first one is from Allison on Instagram. And Allison's question is, what is the best way to get into service dog training?
Okay, so I get this question a lot. I think we probably all do. I would say it depends. First of all, I don't know what Allison's training background is, but there are two major components to service dog training, and one is training dogs, and the other is working with people with disabilities. So you really have to have a passionate interest in working with disabled people and helping them to have a better life through training a dog. So that would be the first thing I would say, is to make sure that you really like working with people, and that you really have some comfort and familiarity with people with disabilities of the type that you want to be working with. In terms of how you actually get into the field, there's a number of different ways you can do it. So one is, if you're new to dog training, to just get a lot of experience with dogs. So that could be, working at your local shelter, working, volunteering, or anything involving, working with a groomer or a kennel, or, just getting a lot of experience with dogs is a great place to start. If you have a dog, start training your own dog to a really high level, just to practice training, increase your own training chops, and make sure you really love dog training, because you have to really love dog training if you're going to go into this field. And then also, if you are not familiar with life with a disability, to also get some involvement working with people with disabilities. Again, that could be volunteering or working or social or community groups, and make sure that that is something that you enjoy and are familiar with. If you already have those components, then there's a couple of ways that you can go. So one is to, if you're interested in training dogs through a program, an organization that trains the dogs and then matches them with disabled handlers, you can volunteer for one of those programs, and that usually involves a lot of things like grunt work, like cleaning kennels and taking dogs out into the yard to potty and scooping poop and things like that. And then you might be able eventually to work your way up through the ranks and become an apprentice. The other way that you can do it is to apprentice with a service dog trainer, to do a mentorship course through a service dog trainer. I offer a mentorship course myself, and I'm always happy to work with aspiring and new trainers. Or you can just get really involved in dog training. It doesn't have to be a service dog trainer to start. You can mentor with a trainer of pet dogs, and then if you like that, you can keep going and do a service dog training course. So there are a number of different courses, in addition to, like my membership at your service dog training. There's also Atlas. If you're already a professional rewards-based dog trainer and you want to go into service dog training, Veronica Sanchez has a course called Cooperative Paws, which is really great too. So there's a number of different avenues, but the first place to start is really get a lot of experience training dogs, make sure you love that, and also that you really love working with people, and feel really comfortable with the disability side of things. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
That's pretty comprehensive,
Okay.
I think. Amazing. All right. Okay, so Allison had a second part to their question, and that is, what is bond-based training, and how does it differ from positive reinforcement training? I'll pass that to Rebecca.
That is an interesting question. And words are important. I think bond training is important in service dog training. And bond training, I suppose there's a lot of ways we can decipher that, what that means. For me, what that means is the connection with your dog and the respect of who your dog is. And that's genetically, what kind of dog are they bred to run or sit or pay attention to you or not pay attention to you. And that's all going to be really important in the relationship with your dog, but also the way that your dog's happiness in providing the help that you need. So that is important. I personally like to combine different, what would be positive reinforcement with an emphasis on the bond training to make sure you are doing both, because both are important. Your dog isn't going to work just for the bond necessarily. I think there's an understanding and a mutual respect that happens in time. But for teaching specific tasks, I think it needs to be a little bit more cut and dried and intentional. And using positive reinforcement is a great way to do that. Of course, emphasizing on the proper way to do that, so it's not just about the food, but the motivation. And you can talk to an experienced trainer about how exactly to do that. That's kind of going off topic, but anything else to add about the bond part of the training?
I think something that's important, however you're training, is to have a good understanding of the science behind psychology and behavior science in general. I think that is really helpful because it allows you to kind of adapt in the moment to the dog in front of you. And we all train using a positive reinforcement, force-free type-based method. And there's a lot of people who might use different words to mean different things, but when it all comes down to it, the science behind it all is all the same. So if you have a good understanding of the science, then you can define your words pretty much however you like.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up about the positive reinforcement, because when we got this question, we were all like, what does she mean? What is bond-based training? We looked it up, and there's so many buzzwords out there in the dog training world, and people use different words to mean different things, and we were all a little bit nervous about, like, is bond-based training the same as like buzzwords that sometimes are used to mean, sort of dominance types of training, which it sounds like it's not. But if you are going to work with a trainer who says they use positive reinforcement, definitely ask them, what do you mean by that? Because there's a lot of trainers now who might say they use positive reinforcement, and if you ask them what they mean, they say, oh, well, we praise the dog, but they're still using punishments, corrections. So it's I like what you said about finding out what the science is behind.
Absolutely. And then also I would add to that whoever you work with as a trainer, make sure you get along with that person and you have the same values, because there's a lot of different ways to train within the same positive reinforcement parameters. So it's important to know what your values are and what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Trainer too.
It has to be positive reinforcement for the human as well as the dog.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so the next question is from Julie Wintraub, who is a trainer in New York City. And Julie says that she's a new service dog trainer, and she recently got an inquiry from a family who's interested in potentially training their dog to be a service dog for one of their children. There aren't a lot of specifics about the child in question here, their age, the disability, but they did mention that they want to explore the option of the dog going to school with the child. So Julie's wondering what would be topics to discuss with the family and what would be some kind of considerations about a dog going to school with a child. And this is something that I see fairly frequently through my business. And I have a few thoughts. Now, it's kind of hard to give any specifics without knowing the individual situation, because as we all know, service dogs are very, very individual. Anything from the task requirements to the public access requirements are very specific to the individual's case. So in this case, number one, how old is the child? That's a really big question. Number two, what is the disability and what are the child's support needs? Those are really big questions as well, because all of that will be a big determining factor in whether a dog is going to be appropriate to go to school with the child. The other things to think about are, what kind of school is it? Is it a really big, very busy school, or is it maybe a smaller kind of individual focused type school where it's a little bit more of a flexible learning or calmer environment? So those things are something that's important to think about as well. The other thing to think about is that, does the child have a support worker with them at all times, or are they kind of going through the education system more independently? So if there is a support worker present and the support worker is willing to be involved with the dog's care, that might be a fine option. If not, in that case, the child needs to be very independent and reliable with the dog's care and training. So a couple different suggestions or options of different situations that might occur. Very commonly, there might be teenagers who would benefit from a service dog. They're in high school, maybe they're in a more flexible learning type of high school environment. They're very interested in the training behind their service dogs, and they're very motivated. And in those cases, I feel much more comfortable exploring the option of the dog going to school with the child, because the child is very responsible, a little bit older, and is already practiced at going through the school system independently. Now, another option might be if it's a younger child, let's say it's a 6-year-old with various developmental disabilities who needs a support worker with them throughout the education system. In that particular case, we would want to make sure that there's support from other people other than the child, of course. So the main question, really, to keep this shorter, is how reliable is the child at caring and training with the dog independently? And if there's a little bit of a question around that, I would recommend holding off on the school training for a little bit and just observing how the child interacts with the dog and trains with the dog in other less intense public access environments. Because then what you can see is, without prompting, how often does the child help with feeding or water or taking the dog out for pee breaks? How is the child with kind of interrupting the dogs if the dog is distracted or doing any kind of training that way? So if the child is very reliable and independent with the dog in other contexts, then that might be something to consider about the school.
I would also point out that it doesn't necessarily need to be the entire school day that the dog is there. So sometimes if it's a challenging period or an after-school event or something in particular, the dog can kind of come to school for an hour, maybe come back. So that's another option. Again, if it's an appropriate situation and the child is old enough.
Yeah, and I would also add, because I think the laws in Canada are different. I don't know. I don't know about those. But certainly in the United States, it is true that you cannot require you can't require a teacher or teacher's aide or somebody employed by a public school system to provide any care for the service dog. So it either have to be that like Claire was saying, that the child or teen is able to manage the dog themselves, or that a parent or somebody that the family has hired is the handler for the dog and is coming to the school with the child and the dog. And I would also, like both my colleagues have said, I would start with doing stuff at home first. But if you're at all considering having your child bring a service dog to school, start speaking with the school system right away, to start discussing it with the administration and the teachers before you get the dog, or if you're applying for a service dog, or if you're going to train your own service dog, because conflicts with school systems and school districts are really common, and the more you can do to get ahead of that and sort of lay the groundwork, the better.
Totally agree. Yeah. Last bit about that, if you are having trouble discussing the option of a service dog with the school system, your trainer might have some extra information about the laws and be able to advocate with you throughout the process. So don't hesitate to ask your trainer about that process as well.
There's also an organization that serves the US, I don't know if they serve Canada, that is called, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name, and they're in Worcester, Massachusetts, Canines for Disabled Kids. It's caninesforkids.org, canines, CANINES, and they do information, referral, advocacy, and scholarships for kids and teens to get service dogs. So what I love to refer to their executive director, Kristen, for answering questions about advocating with school systems and information and referral on working with schools.
Amazing. That's a great resource. All right. The next question is from Nancy Friedman-Smith of Good Dogs Training in Portland, Maine. And Nancy has a question about service dog and training puppy in one of her group classes. And Nancy mentions that this puppy was really mouthy and biting very quickly and pretty hard, specifically to access the treats in her hand. So Nancy did mention that the puppy made some progress in class and went home with a bit of bite inhibition homework, but she's a bit worried about this dog's potential future as a service dog. And for context, this is a 12-week-old pit mix.
Yeah, and also just for a little context, because I know Nancy, she's a very experienced trainer who's worked with a lot of dogs, and she said it was biting harder and faster.
Never bit so hard.
Bit so hard and so fast. So just to put that in context, it's, because all puppies are going to do some degree of mouthing. So
yeah. Right. Well, we would like to start with this one. It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors to consider, and this is one factor. So we wouldn't make a determination right off the bat with this, but I would certainly be concerned, and I would say something to the client about my concern because of the dog's arousal level. Because a dog who's going to work out well for public access needs to be able to sort of go with the flow. And a dog who's showing that degree of difficulty controlling its mouth in class, and the way that they're expressing that with biting hard, isn't a good indicator for long term in terms of how that dog is going to grow up. When we see things in puppies, it's tricky because speaking of puppies, Claire's going to just go
behind the couch.
Her puppy is burrowing behind the couch right now. When we see things in puppies, we have to try to extrapolate to how is this behavior going to evolve over the course of this dog's life and what it's going to look like. And of course, environment and training play a huge role in that. But I would be concerned about it, and I would speak with the client just to let them know that this was a concern, I wouldn't say absolutely this dog can't be a service dog candidate, but I would be concerned about it. Because it shows to some degree potentially a little bit of a lack of sociability or connection with the handler's emotions, and just the arousal level would be concerning as well.
If this concern was coming from like a new puppy owner, I would have some questions about how are you delivering the food, and is the dog really tired, and is the dog really hungry, and that kind of stuff. But because this is coming from an experienced trainer, I'm making some assumptions that those things have kind of been addressed before considering this kind of arousal issue. But I totally agree.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the dog is really young also is another thing, and so a lot can change. I mean, the underlying arousal is there for sure, but I agree it's too soon to kind of make a definite call, but definitely plant the seeds so that this might be an issue down the line.
Yeah.
But it's important to work on anyway, regardless of how that puppy's
True.
gonna grow
Yeah.
up, so.
Absolutely.
Good work, Nancy.
Yes. All right. Okay, so the next question, which I believe, it's not quite the last one.
We got a lot of questions.
We've got a lot of questions. Here we go. So the next one is from Lee Atherton, and that's a client of Sharon's. And Lee is wondering, they'd like a list of the things a dog can be trained to do for someone with PTSD and anxiety. It's a big list.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very common tasks that I see a lot of my clients benefiting from, who might have PTSD and anxiety. Specifically, I'm thinking in a public environment. Those might be some subtle grounding exercises. So things like chin rests, or lying on the person's feet, or standing in between their legs, or leaning against them, or applying a little bit of pressure can help with grounding in public spaces if the person is not able to kind of remove themselves from the environment. So that's a very common thing that we'll train. It is also, usually a good thing to train kind of early on, because it's a little bit easier for the dog and it can provide a little bit of help immediately for the handler. Other things might be some crowd control exercises. So blocking, which means that the dog puts their body in between the handler and the public, whether it's in front or behind or to the side, or even in motion, so circling around the handler. Those are some pretty common ones that I see in public, but there are lots and lots that can also be done in various environments, so I will hand it off.
Well, those, and
Yes.
also sometimes some type of guiding, like take me to an exit, take me to my car. That can be one, or people who their anxiety expresses itself in self-directed behavior, like scratching or hair pulling or things like that they don't realize they're doing those things, and they want the dog to interrupt them so they can choose a healthier option. So training the dog to notice and alert to those behaviors and interrupt them. What else? I know there's a ton of them.
There's so many, and I think this is a good time to kind of circle back to how individual this can be and how everybody's symptoms and triggers are a little bit different. I've worked with dogs where we've trained the dog when the person comes home to run in and kind of make sure the house is empty, for example, to position themselves in between the person so that they'll keep a watch out on the door. And this particular dog kind of did this naturally, but it's a good thing. It makes the client feel a lot better to feel like they've got eyes all around, because that hypervigilance can be something that they can have the dog do instead of the person.
Yeah, or turning on a light.
Yep.
When they go in the house.
Yeah, there's lots of other potential options: depressure therapy, responses to panic attacks or flashbacks, whether it be like a retrieve of medication or headphones or a phone or emergency panic button or retrieving a helper in the house. There's a really wide variety of behaviors that might be taught, and one individual service dog for PTSD is not usually going to have the entire range of tasks. So it's a situation where it's really helpful to write down kind of what are your most disabling symptoms, and maybe you speak with your trainer, you speak with your care team, your psychiatrist, and you ask them, hey, what could I potentially benefit from? And you can bring them some ideas as well. This can be really a community effort, and it's really helpful to have some feedback from people around you who kind of know how you might typically respond and can support you in that moment as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything you both said. I just thought of a couple others,
Amazing.
you know, like, or maybe you said this already, medication reminder, setting timers so the dog alerts to those. And also, I have a number of clients where we've trained the dog to like lick their face or lick their ears, or, you know, do some type of sort of tactile interaction. Or even one client, we were training the dog to, she sort of wanted to do EMDR with the dog. So the dog was just doing like touch back and forth on both hands during therapy sessions. So it's
Lots of options.
Yeah.
So many, and yeah, there's not really a limit. I think
Yeah.
what works for you can be trained.
Yeah,
In most cases.
Yeah.
I just
yes.
All right. Okay. The next question, also from Lee, is how to train responding to nightmares and night terrors or panic attacks at night. And I will pass that. I think we can all kind of pitch in on this one.
Again, there's so many, there's so much. There could be the type of dog, is your dog a heavy sleeper? Is this possible for your dog to do? That may not be the case. Some dogs naturally are very aware of their person and can do that. They might notice a difference in breathing and even alert you before you are having your nightmare or night terror. Or it might be you need some support as you wake up. So there's lots of different variables that could be involved in this.
I usually do ask clients some questions when we get started. You know, is there somebody else? Like, is the client sleeping with somebody else? Is that person waking up? If so, they could call the dog over and give the dog treats and, you know, encourage the dog to cuddle with the handler. So sometimes that's helpful if you have an emotional support human that you can bridge the training with. I also always start, if this is a long-term solution, with making sure that we're focusing on training the dog to be able to sleep in the bedroom loose with the client, ideally in the bed. But that depends on the needs of the handler and the dog, or the partner if they're sleeping in the bed too. Because your dog can't do anything for you during a nightmare or a night terror if it's crated or if it's in the living room. So I always start with making sure that we're doing all the foundation work that we can to have the dog sleeping with you. Because in my experience, and we were talking about this before we started, some dogs do just sort of do this naturally, but you have to lay the groundwork for that and have the dog like sleeping in the bedroom, you know, sleeping in the bed. If the dog is naturally starting to notice when the handler is waking up and coming over and comforting them, or waking them up themselves. I had a client I worked with who we trained a rough collie as a service dog, and she just started on her own, just interrupting and waking the handler up and cuddling with them. But we had, you know, done a lot to sort of, coming back to the bond-based training, they had a really good bond. And we had made sure that from a young age, she was good to be loose in the bedroom and sleeping in the bed with them.
Super. From a very kind of practical tasking perspective, I tend to teach behaviors like turning on a light, and then offering kind of tactile stimulation like the licking the face or deep pressure therapy if that's helpful for the particular client. Other things that can help, maybe turning on music, or turning on like a voice recording, or using a panic button that connects to kind of a support line. So there are kind of a number of things that might be helpful in the moment. Some people need water, some people need rescue medication. Again, this is something that it's really independent, and it's really dependent on what do you need in that moment. You might need an ice pack. You might need, and some people might feel comfortable retrieving those items themselves, and some people might not. So it's very dependent on the particular symptoms and the particular coping mechanisms that the handler is using. Generally, though, turning on a light is a pretty solid option.
That's great. I love that, bringing in the operant behaviors, the tasks and stuff. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so here we go. All right. The next question is also from Lee, and that is a question about balancing the having two service dogs. So one service dog is a little bit older, and then there is the successor service dog who's a little bit younger. And that does sound like a balancing act that needs a lot of care and attention. So I'll pass that over to Sharon.
Yeah, so Lee is a client of mine, and the story is that she had a service dog named Shadow that we had trained together, and he was working. He's a great service dog, and then he very sadly got cancer. So she was told he had at most 6 months to live with chemotherapy. He went into remission right away, and 2 years later, he's still around. He's still in remission, which is wonderful. But meanwhile, she got another puppy to raise and train as her successor service dog, which I had encouraged her to do. His name is Phoenix, and now she's got these two dogs. So I think it's really important to think about what is the reasonable expectation of a working lifespan for your service dog, given their age and their breed and things like that, their size, and to sort of think ahead and plan ahead. If you have two dogs, if you have a working service dog and you get a second dog to raise and train, the benefits of that are that you are already getting the support that you need from your working service dog, and that dog can model for the younger dog. So I did this. My first service dog was Jersey. She was 8, I think, when I started. I brought on a successor named Gadget, who was probably about 1 or maybe 10 months old. And it was great, actually, for me, because she was a wonderful model. And I would have her do a behavior and he would watch, and then I would have him do it. And there was a little bit of friendly competition between them. Maybe some more friendly than others. But it was great because I was getting the help that I needed for my service dog. My younger dog was learning from my older dog. It made the training process much faster and easier and less stressful for everybody. But it is harder on the older dog when they see the younger dog coming in. So you do have to balance that. It is a lot of work to provide the care that both dogs need, mentally, physically, enrichment, the relationship support, and all of the training. And that's complicated too. And of course, the expense and the time and all of that. So it's just some considerations as you're considering moving forward with this. But if you rely on having a service dog, it can be very difficult to go from having one to having no dog, and then trying to raise and train one from scratch when you're grieving your older dog. So that's why I really encourage people to think ahead about it. In terms of the balancing act, again, like we've said about so many things, it really has to do a lot with individual variation. The ideal is that you can bring your working service dog with you sometimes when you need the support and you need the reliability, and when you're doing better and you have more of your training hat on, and you can do more of the work with your younger dog to bring that dog with you. But you might need to set things up at home first to make sure that your older dog, one consideration is like, can your working service dog be left home alone, or will that dog have a panic attack? Has this dog developed separation anxiety from just having spent years always being with you all the time? So those are some considerations as well. And then just trying your best to, you can't really bring two service dogs with you. It's just too much to handle usually, and it's too hard on the dogs and on you. Unless you were going to like a family event or something where everybody understood, but for the most part, I think it's just about doing your best to try to pick the moments when you can be in training mode with the younger dog and the moments where you need the reliability and support of the older dog. And then sometimes you have two dogs who have different skills, like who have different tendencies to be good at one thing or another, and then you might choose which dog you're bringing with you based on that. But it is normal to feel a little bit overwhelmed and to sort of have to wrestle with, how do I keep my working service dog from getting, too jealous or upset, and giving them enough to do. Sometimes just the training of the younger dog, you can involve the older dog in that, so that you're making them feel that they're still special and they're still helping. So if you have your older dog demo something, you train with them first while the younger dog is watching, and then you give them something to chew on while you're training the younger dog. So there's a lot of different options. You guys want to add anything to that?
No, I know that this particular situation wasn't intentional, but I think it definitely has a silver lining to it, like you said, because the younger dog can pick up on the older dog. And I agree in this situation, a ton of balancing, but really importance on the older service dog, making sure they're not left out, and that's, I think, really important.
Yeah.
Something to think about that I'm currently living right now as well is that living in a multi-dog household for the first time is a really big adjustment. So it's going to be a lot on the handler as well if that's their first time living with multiple dogs in the same home. So that's something that is just top of mind for me right now, but even without the service dog component, it can be challenging. So that's something to
That is a very good point. I've lived in a multi-dog household for so many years that I forget the concept of that whole thing being an issue, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and it can be, sometimes it's like 1 + 1 = 7.
Exactly. It's dog math.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. All right. I think that's all the questions that we had for today. That was super fun. Do you guys have anything else to add? No, I think so.
Thank you, everybody
Alright.
who submitted questions. We really enjoyed answering them.
That's fun.
Amazing.
And thank you both.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.